All right, well, thanks for joining us. This is one of our webinars in the series of webinars that we've had on topics related to investment and entrepreneurs involved in unmanned aerial systems. So we welcome you today. We've got two wonderful speakers who have joined us, and we're going to have a thoughtful conversation about liability considerations when owning or investing in unmanned aerial systems. This is a hot topic and something that we want to delve into today and explore with our panelists. My name is Amanda Radovic, and I'm the program manager of the Cluster Initiative. So today I'm going to be the moderator, and I'm going to take us through today's topic. We have two wonderful speakers. Both are extremely involved in unmanned aerial systems, hold several certifications, have piloted drones and airplanes for a number of years, and have a very unique perspective about the topic that we're going to explore today. So our first speaker is John Calandro, and John is the president of Intellectual Innovation. He's an internationally recognized corporate coach, speaker, and author, and John designed several key propulsion components in the world's first UAV. He also has a unique perspective as an owner, investor, and operator of a drone and drone business. So he's going to talk a little bit about that today, and I'm going to have him tell you a little bit more about himself. And then we've also have joining us is Herman Woody Lepp, goes by Woody. So Woody is a UAS claims manager at Global Aerospace. He's been a manager since, or part of Global Aerospace since 2006. He holds a Part 107 remote pilot certificate, and he owns and operates a Piper 250 Comanche and is an instrument-rated private pilot with approximately 2,100 hours total time. I had to read that a couple times, Woody. That's a lot of hours. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. John, I'm just going to go to you and give you a couple moments to tell us a little bit about yourself and your perspective as we go through this topic today.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Amanda, and thanks to the Cluster Initiative for setting all this up. I'm excited to be here today because I was an investor, owner, operator of a drone business, and I'm really excited because I'm going to learn a lot from Woody as the day goes on, and I'll share a couple of experiences I've had, and so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. And Woody, I want to give you a few moments. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, anything that I didn't touch on, and kind of where you're coming from, your perspective as we talk about liability issues as both an investor and an entrepreneur in unmanned aerial systems.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you also, John. First, I work for Global Aerospace, which is an international aviation insurance provider. We provide insurance both in the all arenas of aerospace. We became involved in the UAS insurance business about 3 years ago, and I've been handling UAS claims now for about 2.5 years. So I'm really looking forward to being a presenter and also gathering information from the rest of you during the course of this presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I know I personally have a lot of questions about this topic. So we're going to get started here, and really I'm just going to start with the #1 question. What are the top liability risks that you are seeing today as this industry kind of evolves? So Woody, I'll kind of start with you. What are you most concerned about today as someone who is involved in this particular industry and as part of the liability issues? Thanks.
The #1 issue that appears to be a bodily injury claim, either from the negligent operation of the UAV. The UAV running into someone can be, I think, can create some bodily injuries. Then, of course, we also have the property damage claim for the negligent operation of the UAV, where it runs into a building, a car, or whatever. So those are the two main concerns that I have right at this present time. Of course, you have the invasion of privacy, which I think is to be a big issue, but so far has not surfaced in our day-to-day operations.
And when you talk about an operator, I mean, this could be someone who is a hobbyist, someone who has a drone business, a large corporation with a drone department. Is that would be the general definition?
Yes, the operator is, to me, the person who's actually in charge, running the controls of the UAV, whether they're operating under 333 exemption or Part 107. Global Aerospace, so far we have not delved too greatly into the hobbyist arena. I think there will be other markets for that type of insurance as time goes on. But right now, my focus has been primarily on what I would call the commercial operator.
Okay, great. So, John, what are the top liability risks that you have seen? And you've got, you know, the perspective of both an owner of a business, an operator. You know, what are you seeing and what are you worried about in your day-to-day when you're out there operating a drone?
Well, I certainly would parrot what Woody said. You know, personal injury and property injury or damage. I owned a drone for hire business that was focused primarily on building inspections for real estate and for building repairs. Our long-term plan also included bridge abutments and cell towers, and those have very unique issues that take a little bit more investment than I had at the beginning of the company, which was primarily buildings and real estate. What we saw was the perception of bodily injury and the perception of property damage rather than the reality of those two things. And so I spent a lot of my time managing fears of the public around the operating drone and trying to be very considerate to the public around the drone. So we would go at times of the day or night when there was a lot less traffic. And there were foot traffic or people traffic or car traffic to go do an inspection of a building, for example. And so while there was no actual damage, there was perception of damage, and that's really hard to quantify. It was a tremendous added cost and burden to my business. We could not go when the sun was right for getting good photographs. We had to go when the sun wasn't so good, and then there was a lot of post-processing of film to make essentially the video usable, because it was too dark when we would go. So there's a lot of ancillary issues, I believe, but certainly, of course, as an owner, I was concerned about maybe the drone having a malfunction and hitting a child walking down the street. That was my biggest fear, and it drove a lot of sort of the design of our processes. It drove us to get very high levels of insurance, training. We would go to routine training and repeat over and over again some of the takeoff and landing and those kind of things. I would triple charge my batteries and always check them. So there was a lot of other things sort of behind the scenes due to damage or injury.
Those are, and that kind of jumps into the follow-up question that I had is, and of course that probably a lot of people out there are thinking as well, is, well, how can I mitigate these risks? And that's kind of what you're touching on, John, is that you have to be very diligent, and it takes a lot of time and thoughtfulness to, and alleviating fears. So Woody, you know, as a provider, what would you say are ways that an entrepreneur or a company, when you're looking at them as a potential customer, what can they do to mitigate these risks?
John, I think, just hit right on the primary thing. Good training, good operating procedures manual, following the operating procedures manuals, making sure that you have a business organization where you take these things into consideration. And this may be going outside a little bit of your question, Amanda, but one of the things that I'm noticing in the claims that I'm handling is the importance of the certificate of insurance. That a person like John, before he can go onto the premises, his customers are going to want to make sure that the operator has the requisite limits of liability insurance to protect them in the event that something does happen.
So a lot of pressure on the operator.
Yeah, the focus is on the operator, or actually it can also be the named insured, but I'm not going to try to get too technical on like the insurance terms. Try to keep it more broad. The issues that John was talking about is something I think a lot of our insureds see on a day-to-day basis, is how am I going to run a safe operation? How do I present myself as a professional operator, as opposed to the person out there who's just, they went and bought themselves a Phantom or Inspire or something like that. Now they think they're in the inspection business, or the cell phone tower inspection business, or whatever it may be.
What are the requirements? I mean, if you're a startup and you're in this industry, I mean, what do you need to be aware of, and where should you begin? I mean, it is always changing, it's emerging. Where do they start, and what do they need to know?
I'll go ahead and address it, then I'll let John kind of chime in here pretty quick. But with my background in aviation claims, what has struck me about UAS is that the operator needs to be concerned and very cognizant of the fact that they are operating in the national airspace system. It's been kind of a eye-opening experience for me to see people, especially who are doing the video work, that they're concerned about the shot. They want to make sure that they get the right sun, the right angle, all the things they just want to get the shot. But they don't understand sometimes that they are actually in the national airspace, that the UAV is actually considered an aircraft by the FAA. So therefore, they need to have the consideration for operating basically an aircraft in the airspace.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, you have experience with this, a very real experience. When you started, both as an entrepreneur, but also as an investor in a UAS company, did you go in with a plan? Did you know what you needed to do? Or was it one of those cases where you just really learned by doing and by experiencing it? And what would you advise a startup based on your experience? And you can tell us a little bit about what happened, like a little bit about your experience also.
Okay, I will. I'll give non-legal advice because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant, but Intelligent Innovation, my company, we do a lot of executive level coaching of small and mid-sized firms on intellectual property, startup, strategy, all sorts of things. And the most common advice I give out, people will come to me and say, hey, I have an invention, I want to do this, I want to do that, or I have 10 employees, but I want to go to 50. And invariably, my first question is are you incorporated? And they'll say, well, no, I'm thinking about it. I don't know if I should do an LLC or an S Corp. And I said, just go do it. Pick one. Get yourself a lawyer. He or she will advise you properly. Do it. I want it done tomorrow before I talk to you next. If you have got something in the national airspace and you are flying it around, you better be incorporated. Because it's sort of the first line of defense, and the very second phone call you should make is to an insurance company. So I'm probably guessing Woody's probably going to agree with me on that. So I did follow my own advice in those two areas. Before we started up, I was incorporated even before I took the very first flight, and it delayed my first flight by a couple of weeks because I was trying to be very strict to that rule. But we did eventually take off, and I was inspecting, in my case, a church steeple. And the churches are very high up, especially here in the Boston area, and very old. It was a 240-year-old church. And a wind gust came, and because of the steepness of a steeple and all that, my drone, which was operating perfectly fine at 1 minute, was crashing down to the ground the next, and into pieces, and luckily it didn't hurt anybody, and it missed a very expensive car right in the parking lot, luckily just by feet. And I was literally picking up the pieces of the drone in the company when my insurance company called, and this is about 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago. They said, we don't know how to properly cover and write for drones and for UASs, so we're going to let your policy lapse, and my policy canceled. So that was a really interesting experience for me, and we closed the firm for a period of time and went in a different direction, which we'll talk to later. We started inventing technology to help with liability. But again, trying to follow one or two of my own rules was we shut down the firm when that insurance certificate expired and regrouped because I really think those two things are that important. And as Woody said, training, those, you know, I wouldn't go out unless the training certs were up to date and those kind of things. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no. So I mean, what I hear you saying is that you really do need to get all those things taken care of, or all your ducks in a row, if you will, before you even begin to think about getting your machine up in the air, whether for whatever purpose of your business. Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And not all insurance policies or for drones are the same.
No, they're not. And I think some of the insurance companies are evolving, and Woody can talk to that better than I can.
Yeah. First, I can't give legal advice. My company prohibits me from doing that. But one of the things that I also would recommend is that you connect yourself with a good insurance agent, somebody who is familiar with the UAS business, either from the aviation side, from the photography side, or whatever. That's the one thing that I've noticed too, is that to the global aerospace, your agents are a broker. And we're dealing with brokers now that their specialty or their expertise or their base knowledge has been in the photography world. But due to the value of some of the sensors on an UAV, they've gotten involved in the, I'm going to call it the drone insurance business. And John absolutely nailed it. It is an evolving industry. I think there's more markets out there. Obviously, I think global is the best, but you know, there's competition. And I think we're all trying to figure out the best way to provide a good product that adequately serves the needs of our insureds. And of course, we make a little money at the same time. You know, John mentioned the expensive UAV that crashed due to a wind gust. You know, these are things that happen. We see UAVs. In fact, I think probably within the last week or two, I probably have had 2 or 3 claims where wind has been involved in the impact of the UAV, either with a tree and then to the ground, or just straight blows it to the ground. So in addition to the liability concerns that we discussed earlier in this presentation, there's also what we call hull insurance, or physical damage insurance. And a lot of the people I talk to, this is their first foray into dealing with any type of claim with a UAV. And so the hull insurance or physical damage is equivalent to the collision coverage on your car. There's deductibles involved, but what it can do is it can keep a person from going out of business and get them back in business in a relatively short period of time.
Wonderful. So I'm going to change gears just a little bit. I want you to put your investor hats on. So John, I'll kind of go to you first. So as an investor in a startup, you know, what are the reasons why investors, I get the impression, and maybe you can correct me, I get the impression that investors are sometimes a bit shy about investing in UAS, or hesitant because of these liability issues that are being brought up, that things they see in the news, fears, as you said, just alleviating fears of things that may or may not ever happen. Does this prohibit investors, or you know, what would they be looking for, and why are these liability issues? Is it something that they steer clear of? How can you alleviate their fears, and what are you seeing out there in the investment universe when it comes to this?
Well, I'll use that terrible word called risk and return, risk versus return. And what I've seen is that investors in this space really want a level of return that's more than they can get in the market. So if they can get 6% in a really safe investments in the market, they get 10 or 12% with some risky things, you know, some REITs and that, this and that they feel more comfortable with. When you get to a UAS investment, you almost have to be talking in the double digits. You have to be talking 20s and 30s, just like an internet startup. So if you have an angel or a first or second tier investor, they really want to see in those higher numbers because they realize there's a lot of failure. They realize competition is building every day in this industry, which is very exciting. It's an entrepreneurial industry. Young and old are getting into it. It's a lot of it's in the cities, but out in the farms, there's entire drone companies that focus on GPS mapping of farms out in the Midwest. Here in the Northeast, you know, it's inspections and everything in between. And so the investor community does want to see higher levels of return, and they want to see your roadmap. We had a roadmap that talked about how inspections were going to go from area to area and end up in bridges and end up at which is very lucrative, and then cell towers, and ultimately we were going to look at wind turbines that are out in the ocean, which are very hard to inspect. And that sort of roadmap, it's something we do with all our clients. The roadmap is really what the investors want to see, and then they want to see the drops of return along the way, and even the drops of intellectual property along the way. And I think that's what you have to provide an investor, because otherwise they can go to Wall Street and get 6% and be happy. You have to give them more than that.
So as a startup or someone who's talking with an investor, whether it be licensing, angel, VC investment, is that going to be part of the due diligence process? I mean, should I be prepared for that in advance? I mean, is that just a given that they're going to dive into that?
100% given. They're going to ask to see, as Woody would say, they're going to ask to see your insurance certificate, your licenses, everything. And as I say, I think they're going to ask to see your roadmap. And where are you going in 3, 4, 5 years? How am I going to, why would I invest in you? And a lot of investors, especially in this space, are excited by the technology. They envision themselves as pilots too. And I think bringing them into that side of the business and letting them touch and feel the technology will also often be the difference in the deal.
And Woody, are you seeing this on your side as, you know, kind of the other side as the provider? Are you seeing this be more and more of a concern, or more people coming to you and asking you these kinds of questions related to investment and when they're starting up, or if somebody's going through the due diligence process?
I don't see that so much from the claims side, but what I do see on the claims side is, I think, a lack of a business plan, which then leads to more issues with the success of the insured over the long run. As John pointed out, having a good business plan, being able to present that to the investors, which includes a certificate of insurance, your operating procedures, those types of things I would assume would be very concerning to an investor. But I would also assume that, for example, if an investor they invest in a project, they want to make sure that there's some protection to at least the physical assets. And one of the things that we do offer is some type of what we call breach of warranty coverage, that or an additional insured that we can make the investor whole in case there's physical damage to the UAV. So all those things start coming together in the business planning process of the operation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, and this next question I'm going to get into, this is something that's probably near and dear to me, because we do work with a lot of startups, new technologies, whether they're coming out of federal lab, research institutions, universities, is how, and it's evolving all the time. So the technologies around UAVs, UAS, whatever terminology you want to use, these wonderful machines, autonomous machines, there's so many different technologies that are emerging today. A big one is sense and avoid, coming up with a management system for the airspace, a new management system for the airspace. So those are just a couple examples, but are you seeing that the industry is following this, these technology developments? Are these technology developments going to impact liability? And if they are, how do you think they are going to impact liability. So Woody, I'll kind of start with you. You know, how are emerging technologies changing probably what you do every day?
The goal appears to me with the changing technologies is to make the UAV safer and more reliable. And as that technology evolves, obviously our underwriters factor that into how they rate and what premiums they're going to charge for that particular risk. The goal, at least at Global Aerospace, is not to be an obstacle to the issuance or to the advancement or the evolution of the UAS business, but to be a partner with in the industry and be kind of on the forefront as these technologies increase the margin of safety. The bottom line is the safer the process, the safer the UAS, the better off everyone's going to be in the entire industry.
So John, what are you seeing out there? What is the effect of technology on liability for you know, just going forward, a future forward look?
Yeah, I think we're just starting to see how technology can impact safety. When I had my drone crash, my partner and I stepped back for a minute, and we did an interesting, we used an interesting Six Sigma tool, and we looked backwards towards the root cause. So we did the 5 whys. We looked backwards at what is the root cause of the danger of UASs and UAVs. And we came down to the idea that the most important part really is getting to where you're supposed to go at that moment. Okay, where the pilot wants the UAV to go and where it actually goes, there's a small difference. And we wanted to bring that down to 0, that point to 0. And so we invented a bunch of technology in that space so that we had essentially 3 patents. Now they're issued and they're actually up for sale, which would help if you were delivering a package, go from A to B. It's the last mile. GPS, everyone relies on GPS very heavily with drones. GPS is only really good to 26.5 feet on average globally, around 16 feet in reality in the US. 16 feet is a big error. It's the difference between a drone landing in the middle of the street and causing a car accident, or landing in your driveway where you want to deliver the pizza, so to speak. So we really focused on that, and we invented in that area, and it's technology. Amanda, you mentioned sense and avoid. This is actually sense and target technology. It's the whole point of it. We call it sense and target, and it's that last mile. How do you get there? How do you get there accurately so you don't land in the middle of a playground, so you don't land in the middle of a lake and lose your drone? It's all related to that. And so yes, my answer is yes. I do think technology is going to lower risk over time. I do think technology is going to help with premiums when underwriters see that you adopted this, the very latest technology, whatever it is, or multiple redundant systems is a new thing that's coming, or you don't have that technology. Therefore, you should pay a higher premium.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, the more uses that become available and the more machines that are out there, it seems to increase the liability issues, but then the better the technology gets, it will decrease those liability issues. So it seems very much like a balancing act, and hopefully they can keep up with each other. So, you know, where does FAA fall on all this? Where are the rules, the regulations involved? Are they having these conversations about liability? Are they putting down requirements, enforcements? You know, what does that look like today? And Woody, I'll start with you. I'm sure you are always looking at what the current regulations are or what's coming down from FAA. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about where they stand on this.
The adoption of Part 107, I think, was a game changer when it comes to UAS in the commercial industry. That allows people to go out, get their Part 107 license, and truly operate in a commercial manner. And it's my understanding that the Part 107 license follows the individual. So if I'm a UAS operator today with a Part 107 license, I might be able to go to work for another business entity 2 or 3 weeks from now, again, absent some type of employment agreement. And so that really is good for the individual. I think the FAA is also trying to figure out how they're going to adopt and adapt and incorporate the UAVs into the national airspace system. My understanding is there's approximately 300,000 aircraft on the FAA registry. At one time, there was approximately 600,000 UAVs on the FAA registry, so about double in a short period of time. Now, there's been some issues here recently whether or not a hobbyist has to register their UAV, and I'm going to stay away from that. But even assuming the 50% of the hobbyist drones are going to fall off the FAA registry, you're still going to end up with a significant number of UAVs that are operated for commercial purposes that are going to be operating in the national airspace system. The thing that I keep seeing from our insureds is the ability to apply for a waiver from the FAA so they can operate beyond line of sight and also night operations. I think that answered most of your question, didn't it, Amanda? If you have more.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and John, I mean, so you're an entrepreneur or you're an investor, and maybe you are, going through this for the first time. You're trying your best to follow all the rules and regulations, make sure that you have the appropriate certifications, making sure that you are getting, a good policy, the right policy. So how does FAA and what they're doing kind of factor into how you're going to set this up, or some of the decisions that you're making, or how do you just keep track of it all?
Yeah. It's really hard, and I know the FAA is doing their best to keep up, but they're federal agencies, so they have to weigh probably more rocks in their hands juggling than the rest of us just want to weigh the one rock and go ahead and operate our businesses. So I know it's a very difficult and complicated discussion, but as an entrepreneur, I just want to know what I need to do to stay legal and go make money. And I think that's been very difficult for a lot of us. It's been a little bit of a moving target, but what I would say is that you talk to other people that are a little closer to the FAA. That's what I did, and I sort of planned out logical increments of my business. When I thought, well, this rule could affect me this way, and this rule could affect me that way, and they're both on the docket. And I would make plans. And again, a lot of it was for my investor community, so that they would be more comfortable of, well, if this happens, my company can go that direction. And if this happens, well, I got to stop that, but I can start this. So we had, I guess you would call, run scenarios, and tried to stay within the letter of the law for the current laws, but also plan a little bit for the future, not knowing what it might bring. The other thing I was not able to do, but a couple of my friends did in the industry, was they were very vocal and wrote letters in to the FAA, said, hey, look, here's an emerging business. We intend to go this direction. You need to deal with it. One guy, I'll just give a quick example because maybe this will resonate with some people. One guy, his whole business is based on taking pictures of yachts. I never knew that was a business, but it was. Because people
you every day. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. People with big boats, I guess, have big money, and they like pictures of themselves. Also, for the sale of the yachts, yacht brokerage is a big business, and the FAA hadn't thought through that. He said, "You got to think through it, because I'm going to go do it. And if you don't like it, it's tough luck. You're behind me, and I'm ahead of you." And it forced them to think through some of that. And so I wasn't one of those vocal people, but there are people out there, and they're great to interface with, and they have a closer beat on the heartbeat of the regulations.
So what I'm really hearing is that industry is the driver. Industry is shaping this. Industry is the driver. Industry is, we're all concerned about liability and, of course, injury and accidents, but that, the FAA will probably follow the lead of industry here. They're really pushing because they're needing that to happen now.
They want to make money now.
So kind of the final question that I'll ask you, and changing hats again, we'll put your futurist hat on. If you had to look 10 years ahead, I mean, this industry is changing, sometimes I feel like day to day. If you had to look 10 years ahead, how will drone insurance evolve and what role will it play? And Woody, I know you've probably given this a lot of thought, probably I'm sure you and your colleagues talk about this, you know, where is this going to go? So I'm really curious to get your perspective on that.
There's a couple things, I think. I think the whole UAV insurance industry will continue to evolve as we all on the insurance side become more knowledgeable of what products are out there and how those products affect basically the loss ratio. You know, do they are they substantive in what they do? I think securing insurance will become maybe a little bit easier. Right now, for what I would call the occasional commercial operator, there's an application out there where people can buy UAS insurance by the hour in certain locations. I think that's going to be the type of thing. It's going to be a continuous evolution of the product, so we could fill the needs of our customers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, John, what do you think in the next, you know, if you had to look 10 years ahead, going as someone who's had to go through the process of navigating what you need and when you need it, what do you think will change?
I can tell you what I hope would change. So I like, you know, some of the things Woody said. Of course, it would be great for a small business owner, and the whole a la carte, so you can choose. Hey, if there's so many different uses of drones and UASs, so you could choose the right insurance for what you're doing at that time, the right amount that you need, maybe by the hour or whatever it is, by the mile, the square mile, essentially. The other thing I think that really needs to change is the understanding of interstate rules and state by state. Some states have their own rules, especially for insurance and UASs, that are different from the national rules. So understanding all that so that you don't need to be a lawyer to buy insurance. When I did it a couple years ago, I needed to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, just to buy insurance. It was very complicated. And so I'm thinking someday that'll be a little simpler, like you just click.
That would be great. I did not know that you could, or if that was an option to buy it by the hour. So that's interesting.
Neat.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. All right, well, I'm going to open it up to some questions, and this is both for John and Woody. Do you have any experience with product liability insurance for unmanned aircraft products?
We do. I've seen a couple policies come across my desk already where we do have products completed operations for the UAV manufacturer. One thing about global aerospace is that, especially here domestically, when I say domestically in the United States, we have a very large investment in products liability insurance for all sorts of aviation manufacturers. I see that that's where our business will continue to grow. We will continue to insure the operator, whether it's the Phantom, the Inspire, the Unique, whatever, as well as the specialty stuff. But I also see us insuring the manufacturers of the UAVs for claims that could be made against the manufacturer of the UAS.
John, did you have any experience with this, or and this is probably a question more for Woody, but you know, what has been your experience when you were shopping?
No, I really don't have much. I just tried to get the best equipment I could, keep it in good condition, but I didn't understand or have any firsthand knowledge of that.
So we have another question here. So this is, does the fact that a UAV or drone, that it's legally considered an aircraft by FAA give you or your peers headaches, especially when you're talking about shooting down drones? So this is an interesting question. Woody, have you had any of these kinds of situations pop up, and what's been your experience in this scenario like that?
We have not had any claims where our drone has been shot down. There is from what I read in some of the periodicals, the drone slayer claim came out of, I think, Kentucky or Tennessee, where the drone was flown over the backyard of a guy, and whose daughter was maybe out in the backyard, and the guy shot it down, and then his neighbor initially filed there was a criminal complaint filed that was dismissed. A civil case was filed, and then that case has now been dismissed. So right now, like I said, I haven't had any claims involving the shooting down of a drone.
I'm happy to hear that. So here's a question that I'll give you both a chance to answer, because John, as a shopper of liability insurance for your uses, maybe you have some insight on this, and Woody, you can definitely talk to this. So this question is from Kim, and she was wondering, does standard drone liability insurance policy include coverage and cost of defense for an administrative, civil, criminal charge or action? So kind of tying into the last question, if something does happen and you have to go to, charges are pressed against you, does the insurance cover that? Is that part of it? And then I guess I even have an additional question beyond that. What does it cover? I mean, a basic policy. What would a basic policy cover? So John, what was your experience when you're shopping around? I mean, were you thinking about that? Was that a concern?
I was, and if I remember correctly, my policy specifically excluded it, and I was not happy about that. But it was the only policy I could get at the time, and I was in a hurry, and I just wanted to get flying, and I was much more worried about the child in the playground scenario than I was about any other scenario, so I bought it. But if I remember right, it did not include that.
So Woody, what's your experience with this? What are you seeing when you're providing policies?
I would have to look at our policy, because I don't think we've had any claims or been presented yet with anything that talks about basically the cost of defense of an enforcement action. The FAA comes against you for trying to take your 107 license away because they thought that you were operating in a unsafe manner. I'm glad the person did bring up the cost of defense. In the event that, we'll use the example, John's deal, if the drone, instead of missing the car, actually hit the car, and litigation is sued where you're a defendant in litigation, the cost of defense is one of the real benefits of having an insurance policy. A good lawyer, a good law firm to defend you and really sort out what actually happened in the accident is very valuable to our insureds when it comes to the property damage or bodily injury claim.
So this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, talking about technology and technology integration. This is probably a question more for you, Woody, does the insurance industry follow research going on at the federal level for kind of safety technologies, if you will, and how the integration into national airspace? Is that something that you are thinking about on a daily basis, or that you have a plan for?
I'm sure our underwriters are thinking about it, and one of the things that we see from the claims is how we pass that information on to our underwriting staff. Is if we pick up information in our day-to-day discussions with our insureds on the claims side, we have our underwriting staff is basically spread out all over the country, so this information is coming to us in all sorts of directions, and so I think we're staying on top of it pretty well.
And John, as an investor, I mean, is this a concern of yours? Is this something that you were thinking about as you were looking at a company or a technology, or would you be looking at where the technology is going and the integration into national airspace?
Oh yes, of course. It's very important. And Woody and I were talking earlier is that I've noticed all of a sudden when you go to a store for a toy drone, and even some of the more substantial drones that you could do a small business with, they all have propeller guards on them just recently, like this year. And a couple years ago, there was no propeller guards. So just seeing that change shows me that the manufacturers are thinking about it, and it's making its way through the industry.
So, we've kind of touched on a lot of different topics here, and I, Woody, I have kind of a question for you. Are there a lot of providers that you can go to, and John, you'll be able to talk to this too about, shopping around, again, figuring out who's got the best policies, who's kind of most up to date on liability issues and integrates that into what they can offer to you at a reasonable price. I do see other insurance companies out there offering kind of, it's the new thing, offering drone insurance. So Woody, I'll kind of ask you first. I mean, obviously you've been involved in this for a long time and have been providing, liability peace of mind to UAS and UAV companies for a while now. What's the difference, from place to place? I mean, what should somebody be looking for?
The thing that I always recommend to people, whether it's UAS insurance or whether they're out shopping for airplane insurance, is that they associate themselves with a good aviation, or in this case, UAS insurance agent, someone who has access to not only global aerospace, but the other markets. Depending upon your situation, of course, I'm always going to be biased to the global aerospace product. I think we have a great insurance policy. I think our premiums are reasonable. I think we do an okay job when it comes to handling claims. In fact, I think we do a good job of handling claims. But your specific needs may be a little bit different. So if you're with a good agent, they can help lead you through the process of what it's going to take to make sure that you have the proper coverages in place for your particular operation. It is evolving, and I think that's the thing is, it's not like maybe a homeowner's policy or maybe even your auto insurance where, that industry is so mature. It's I don't know how much difference there would be, but it's a mature industry. Here, the products that we saw maybe 2 or 3 years ago are pretty much outdated now. So that's why if you're going to be in the business, you need to have an agent there to help you out with what's best for you.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the day when I go to an insurance website and one of my selections is maybe drone insurance side by side with, homeowners and car and boat. So it's probably going to happen sooner than I think. John, what was your experience? I mean, did you have to shop around a lot? Did you find that there was a huge difference in premiums from provider to provider?
Yes, I had to shop around. I had trouble even finding someone who understood what I wanted to do with my business. They said, well, we have a division that handles aircraft aerial photography. And they said, so they'd send me that way. And they say, well, we understand manned planes, but we haven't written any policies yet for unmanned planes. And again, this was 3 years ago, so it was quite difficult. I did have to make maybe 10, 12 phone calls, and I found a company that had thought through some of the basics, and they wrote me a policy. Now I think people like Woody and a couple other companies understand it a lot better, and they're really diving in. But again, I think that idea of customizing the insurance is really important. I'll give you a quick example. In Massachusetts and in most federal salt waters, there's a minimum of $900,000 of fuel spill liability. So maybe on your small boat, you only have $100,000 of liability, but there has to be a separate rider, at least it's the way I understand it, for fuel spill at $900,000. So if you spill gasoline in the ocean, you have to clean it up. All of the companies up here understand that now and write that in as a rider. And it doesn't even cost a lot. There's really no reason a boat owner shouldn't buy it. I'm a big believer in insurance, actually, so I had no trouble with that whenever it added to my policy. And I think those same kind of things are going to happen with UASs and drones, just customizing the policy, meeting all the local and national laws, allowing them a little bit of an a la carte selection. Like you said, maybe it's going to be right next to my homeowners and boating and car. I'm going to buy my policy someday. So that's my wish anyway.
Well, that's great. And Woody, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about understanding the roadmap of the person and offering some of these a la carte options, that it's going to be more personalized going forward. So I think that's sounds like, John, that's the direction you'd like to see it go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up here at this point. I just want to give a very special thank you both to John and Woody for sharing your expertise. So thank you so much.